I live in the kind of building where everyone pretends not to hear the couple fighting upstairs, where the elevator smells like piss and broken promises, and where the landlord only shows up when someone stops paying rent. 4 floors of peeling wallpaper and water damage, sandwiched between a kebab shop that closes at 2 in the morning and a discount pharmacy that never seems to have customers. I work from home. Customer service for an insurance company, which means I spend 8 hours a day getting screamed at by people who think their policy covers acts of God. My apartment is on the 2nd floor, number 4, and it's exactly big enough for a desk, a bed, and the kind of kitchen where you can touch the fridge and the stove at the same time. The walls are thin enough that I know Mrs. Hoffman in number 3 watches game shows until midnight, and that the student in number 6 practices violin at 7 in the morning like he's training for war. Hair close lived directly across from me in number 5. Lived. Past tense. He died 3 days ago. Heart attack, the paramedics said when they carried him out in a body bag that looked too small for a man his size. He was 72, retired, and spent most of his time shuffling between his apartment and the corner store where he bought lottery tickets and cheap beer. I'd see him in the hallway sometimes, always wearing the same stained cardigan, always smelling like cigarettes and something sour I could never identify. We never really talked, just the occasional nod when we passed each other. The kind of neighbors who share a building but not a life. The thing about working from home is that you become hyper-aware of sounds. Every footstep in the hallway, every door that opens and closes, every conversation that bleeds through the walls. You learn the rhythm of the building, the patterns of when people leave for work, when they come home, when they cook dinner. It becomes background noise, a soundtrack to your life that you don't even notice anymore, until it changes. Close used to shuffle around his apartment at odd hours. I'd hear him moving furniture at 3 in the morning, or talking to himself in a low mumble that sounded like prayer or argument. Sometimes I'd hear music, old folk songs that crackled through what must have been a radio from the 70s. It drove me insane during calls, trying to explain policy exclusions while some warbling voice sang about lost love through my wall. But for the last 3 days, number 5 has been silent. Completely, utterly silent. The kind of silence that feels wrong, like a missing tooth your tongue keeps finding. The building manager came by yesterday to change the locks. I watched through my peephole as he worked, his face carefully neutral, like this was just another Tuesday. When he finished, he stuck a notice on the door about estate processing and contact information for next of kin. The paper was already curling at the edges from the hallway humidity. I should have felt relief. No more shuffling at 3 a.m. No more folk music bleeding through the walls during client calls. No more cigarette smoke seeping under my door. Instead, I felt something else. Something that sat in my stomach like spoiled food. Guilt, maybe. Or the beginning of understanding that silence can be worse than noise. The first night after they took Close away, I slept better than I had in months. No shuffling, no radio static, no coughing fits that sounded like someone drowning on dry land. Just silence, beautiful and complete, broken only by the distant hum of traffic and Mrs. Hoffman's television murmuring through the wall we shared. I should have known it wouldn't last. The building has a particular ecosystem, a food chain of misery that starts with the ground floor apartments, always the loudest, always closest to the street, and works its way up to the fourth floor, where the roof leaks and the heating barely works in winter. The first floor houses the entrance hall, which doubles as a dumping ground for broken bicycles and junk mail nobody bothers to throw away. There's a smell down there. Something that's part mildew, part rotting takeout, part despair. It clings to your clothes if you linger too long. The second floor, my floor, is marginally better. We get less noise from the street, but we're close enough to hear everything that happens below. The stairs creak in specific places. Third step from the bottom, seventh step between the first and second floors, the landing right outside my door. After 2 years here, I can identify who's coming home just by the pattern of creaks. Hoffman takes the stairs slowly, one step at a time, with a pause on each landing. The student in number 6 bounds up 2 at a time, his violin case banging against the railing. The couple on the 4th floor stomps, especially during fights, which is most of the time. Close used to shuffle, slow, dragging steps like his feet were too heavy to lift properly. I'd hear him pause every few steps, breathing hard enough that I could hear it through my door if I was standing close enough. I knew his patterns better than I wanted to admit. The second night, I worked late. A system update meant the database was down until 8 p.m., which meant my shift got pushed back, which meant I was still on calls at 11 when I should have been watching something mindless and eating reheated pasta. The customer I was dealing with wanted to file a claim for a flooded basement, but their policy specifically excluded groundwater damage, and they were not taking it well. The woman's voice climbed higher with each sentence. "Sir, this is unacceptable. Sir, I've been paying premiums for 6 years. Sir, you're telling me I'm just supposed to let my house rot?" I wasn't telling her anything. I was reading from a script, my voice flat and practiced, while I stared at the wall that separated my apartment from number 5. The wall was painted a color that might have been white 20 years ago, but had aged into something closer to nicotine yellow. There was a crack running from the ceiling down to the electrical outlet, branching like veins. Behind that wall, nothing moved. Nothing breathed. Nothing shuffled or coughed or played folk songs at inappropriate hours. The woman hung up on me mid-sentence. I logged the call, closed my laptop, and sat in the blue glow of my monitor for longer than I should have. The apartment felt too quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Wrong quiet. I made myself get up, brushed my teeth, changed into the same shirt I'd been sleeping in for 3 days, because laundry meant going to the basement and I'd been putting that off. Checked that my door was locked, deadbolt and chain both. Set my phone alarm for 7:30. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, where a water stain had formed a shape that looked uncomfortably like a face if you stared at it long enough. The building settled around me with its usual symphony of sounds, pipes groaning, someone flushing a toilet, the couple on the 4th floor having sex or fighting, hard to tell which, Hoffman's television finally going silent around midnight. I must have fallen asleep around 1. The footsteps woke me at 2:37. Heavy, deliberate, starting from somewhere below. Maybe the ground floor, maybe the entrance hall. Not the quick steps of someone coming home late. Not the stumbling of someone drunk. These were measured, purposeful, the kind of footsteps that announced themselves. I lay perfectly still, my breath caught somewhere between my lungs and my throat. The footsteps reached the first floor, stopped. Then came the sound that made my skin go cold. Knocking. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, firm enough to be heard clearly through my floor, through the cheap construction and hollow doors. A pause. Then 3 more knocks. Same rhythm, same force. Someone was knocking on the first floor apartments. I told myself it was nothing. Someone locked out. Someone drunk. Someone looking for a friend. Except it was nearly 3 in the morning, and the knocking was too methodical, too patient. Whoever it was knocked on one door, waited, then moved to the next. I could track their progress by sound alone. First door on the left, second door, third door. The footsteps moved to the stairs. My heart was doing something complicated in my chest, a rhythm that didn't match the footsteps but tried to. I sat up slowly, my sheets damp with sweat despite the cold. The building was old enough that sound traveled weird, bouncing off corners, amplifying in the stairwell. But I could hear them clearly now. Climbing. 1 step. Pause. Another step. Pause. The 3rd step from the bottom creaked. Then the 7th step. Then the landing right outside the 2nd floor. I should have stayed in bed. I should have pulled the covers over my head and waited for morning. Instead, I got up and moved to my door, my feet silent on the cheap laminate flooring. The peephole was scratched and cloudy, installed sometime in the 90s and never replaced, but it gave me a fisheye view of the hallway. The motion sensor light had clicked on, flooding the corridor with its harsh fluorescent glow. It made everything look sickly, washed out, like a photograph left too long in the sun. A figure stood in the hallway, heavy set, wearing a cardigan that might have been brown or gray, hard to tell through the peephole's distortion. The figure moved to Mrs. Hoffman's door, number 3, and raised one hand. 3 knocks. Purposeful. The sound echoed in the narrow hallway, louder than it should have been. I watched through the peephole, my eye pressed so hard against the glass that it hurt. The figure waited, standing perfectly still, facing Mrs. Hoffman's door like a statue. No one answered. Hoffman was either asleep or pretending to be, and I didn't blame her. You don't answer your door at 3 in the morning in a building like this. You pretend you're not home and hope whoever it is goes away. The figure turned. I jerked back from the peephole, my heart slamming against my ribs. For a second, just a flash, I'd seen the face. Slack, familiar in a way that made my stomach lurch. The footsteps moved away from number 3, toward the stairs leading up to the 3rd floor. Not toward my door. Not toward number 4. Not toward me. I stood frozen, listening. The footsteps climbed to the 3rd floor. More knocking, same pattern. 3 knocks per door, measured pause. Move to the next. I could hear them through the ceiling now, tracking their progress. Number 7. number 8, number 9. Then up to the 4th floor. The same ritual. Knock. Move on. The building was completely silent except for those footsteps and that knocking. Nobody answered their doors. Nobody called out to ask who was there. We all just lay in our beds or stood at our peepholes, holding our breath, waiting for it to stop. It took maybe 20 minutes for the figure to work through all the doors. I counted them in my head. Ground floor, 3 apartments. First floor, 3 apartments. Second floor, Mrs. Hoffman's door, then the students, not mine. Third floor, 3 apartments. Fourth floor, 3 apartments. 12 doors, 11 knocks. The footsteps came back down. I heard them descend the stairs with the same measured pace, each step deliberate. Past the 2nd floor, past the 1st floor, down to the ground floor. Then the sound of the building's front door opening and closing, the hydraulic hinge, hissing like a sigh. Then silence. I stood at my door for another 10 minutes, maybe longer, waiting for something else to happen. My legs were shaking. My mouth tasted like copper. The motion sensor light in the hallway clicked off, plunging everything back into darkness. I made myself move. Back to bed, lay down, stared at the ceiling. It was nothing. Someone drunk, someone confused, someone playing a prank. Except the face I'd seen through the peephole. Slack, pale, familiar. Looked exactly like Hair Close. And Hair Close was dead. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I lay there, watching the water stain on my ceiling slowly emerge from darkness as dawn crept in. At 7:30, my alarm went off, and I silenced it immediately, grateful for the excuse to get up and pretend the night hadn't happened. I made coffee, logged into work, took calls. A man wanted to know why his car insurance didn't cover him driving into his own garage door. A woman needed to add her teenage son to her policy and wanted to argue about the premium increase. I read from my scripts, gave my practiced responses, and tried not to think about heavy footsteps and methodical knocking. Around noon, I risked opening my door to grab the mail. The hallway looked exactly like it always did. Peeling wallpaper, scuffed floors, the smell of old cooking and mildew. Hoffman's door was closed. The student's door was closed. And directly across from me, number 5's door was still sealed with the building manager's notice, the paper curling at the edges. I looked at that door for longer than I should have. The notice was dated 3 days ago. Estate processing, contact information, everything official and final. I went back inside and locked my door. Deadbolt and chain both. That night I stayed up. Told myself I was catching up on work emails, but really I was just waiting. My laptop screen cast a blue glow across my apartment, and I sat at my desk with my eyes on the clock in the corner of the screen. 2:30 came and went. 2:35, 2:37. The footsteps started at 2:38. Same pattern, starting from below, working their way up. Heavy, deliberate. And this time I knew what was coming, which somehow made it worse. I moved to my door before the figure reached the 2nd floor, pressed my eye to the peephole, and waited. The motion sensor light clicked on. The figure appeared at the top of the stairs. Same cardigan, same heavy build, same shuffling walk that I'd heard through my wall for 2 years. The figure moved to Mrs. Hoffman's door and knocked. 3 times. Purposeful. Waited. Moved to number 6, knocked again. I couldn't see the face from this angle, but I didn't need to. I knew who it looked like. I knew those shoulders, that posture, that particular way of standing with weight. Shifted to one side, like the other leg hurt. The figure turned toward the stairs leading up. Didn't even glance at my door. Didn't pause, just moved past number 4 like it didn't exist and continued up to the 3rd floor. I listened to the knocking overhead. 3 knocks per door. Methodical, patient, like someone checking off a list. When the footsteps finally descended and the front door hissed shut, I checked my phone. 3:17. The whole thing had taken 39 minutes. I went to my window and looked down at the street. Empty, the kebab shop was dark. The pharmacy was dark. The street light across from the building flickered like it always did, casting uneven shadows. Nobody was there. I told myself I was seeing things. Stress. Too much screen time. Not enough sleep. The mind plays tricks when you're exhausted, creates patterns where there aren't any, sees faces in water stains and shadows. But I'd seen him. Twice now. And he'd knocked on every door in the building except mine. I sat at my desk until dawn, my coffee going cold, my laptop screen dimming into sleep mode. The building woke up around me with its usual sounds. Hoffman's television, the student's violin, the couple upstairs arguing about whose turn it was to buy milk. Normal sounds, daylight sounds. I should have felt better. Instead, I stared at the wall separating my apartment from number 5 and wondered why, out of 12 doors in this building, mine was the only one he didn't knock on. The 3rd night I tried to prepare myself. I set up at my desk with all the lights on, my laptop open to a spreadsheet I wasn't actually working on, a cup of coffee I wouldn't drink, going cold next to my mouse. The idea was to stay awake, stay alert, and prove to myself that whatever I'd seen the previous 2 nights had a rational explanation. 2:38 came right on schedule. The footsteps started below, same as before. I'd been listening so hard for them that when they finally began, I almost jumped out of my chair. Heavy, measured, climbing from the ground floor with that same deliberate pace that made each step sound like a decision. I forced myself to stay seated, to not go to the door, to act like this was normal, like someone walking through the building at nearly 3 in the morning and knocking on every door was just another quirk of apartment living, like the broken elevator or the water pressure that died every Sunday. The footsteps reached the 1st floor. 3 knocks on the 1st door, clear enough that I could hear them through my floor. A pause that I counted. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4 Mississippi, then footsteps moving to the next door. 3 more knocks. Same pause. My hands were shaking. I gripped the edge of my desk hard enough that my knuckles went white. The figure climbed to the 2nd floor. The motion sensor light would be clicking on right about now, flooding the hallway with that sickly fluorescent glow. I heard the footsteps approach Mrs. Hoffman's door. 3 knocks, firm enough that I felt them vibrate through the wall we shared. I couldn't help myself. I got up and moved to the peephole. The figure stood facing Mrs. Hoffman's door, perfectly still. From behind, it could have been anyone. Heavy build, stooped shoulders, that same stained cardigan. But I knew the posture. I'd seen it 100 times. Passing in the hallway, shuffling to the corner store, standing at the mailboxes in the entrance hall, sorting through lottery tickets and bills. The figure waited exactly 4 seconds, then turned toward the student's apartment. As it turned, I saw the profile. Just for a moment, just a flash through the scratched peephole glass. Close's face, slack and gray like meat left too long in a refrigerator. The mouth hung slightly open. The eyes were wrong. Too dark, too empty, like someone had scooped out everything behind them and left just the holes. 3 knocks on number 6. The student's violin case was leaning against his door like always, and the figure's knuckles struck the wood just above it. Then the figure moved past my door. I was standing right there, my eye pressed to the peephole, my breath fogging the glass. The figure walked past number 4 without slowing, without turning, without even a glance, like my door was invisible, like I didn't exist. The footsteps continued up to the 3rd floor, and I finally let myself breathe. My coffee was cold. My hands were still shaking. I went back to my desk and opened a new browser tab, typed "auditory hallucinations, shared building" into the search bar, then deleted it. Typed "grief manifestation neighbors" and deleted that too. I knew what I was seeing. I just didn't want to admit what it meant. The knocking continued overhead. 3 knocks per door, methodical as a metronome. When the figure finally descended and the front door hissed shut, I checked the time. 3:19, 2 minutes longer than the previous night. I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk refreshing my email and watching the sky turn from black to gray to the weak yellow of a morning that felt like a lie. At 8:30, someone knocked on my door. I nearly fell out of my chair. My heart was doing that complicated thing again, slamming against my ribs in a rhythm that felt like panic. I stood frozen, staring at my door like it might bite me. 3 more knocks, firmer this time. "Hello? Is anyone there?" A woman's voice. Not Mrs. Hoffman, younger, sharper. "I'm from number 7. I need to talk to someone." I made myself move, unlocked the deadbolt, kept the chain on, opened the door a crack. The woman from the 3rd floor stood in the hallway, still wearing pajamas under a winter coat. She was maybe 30, with dark circles under her eyes that matched mine. I'd seen her around but never learned her name. She was holding her phone in one hand, the screen showing what looked like a photo. "Did you hear anything last night?" she asked. "Someone knocking?" My throat was dry. "Maybe. I sleep pretty heavy." "Bullshit." She held up her phone. "Look at this." The photo showed her apartment door, number 7. And on the white painted wood there were marks. Dark smears, rusty brown, clustered around the handle and the area where someone would knock. They looked like handprints, like someone had pressed their palm against the door and dragged their fingers down, leaving trails. "That's blood," she said. I called the police. They said they'd send someone, but it's been 2 hours and nobody's come. I'm not crazy. Someone was at my door last night and they left blood on it. I stared at the photo. The marks were clear, unmistakable. 4 fingers and a thumb, a whole handprint pressed against the wood like a signature. Did you see who it was? I asked. No, I was too scared to look, but I heard them knocking on every door on my floor, 3 times each, like they were looking for something. She lowered her phone. Or someone. I wanted to close the door, lock it, pretend this conversation wasn't happening. Instead, I heard myself say, Did they knock on every door? What? On your floor? Did they knock on every single door? Or did they skip any? She looked at me like I was insane. Maybe I was. I don't know. I wasn't exactly taking. It doesn't. I started to close the door. I'm sure the police will figure it out. Wait. She put her hand against the door, stopping me. You heard them too, didn't you? I can see it on your face. We should talk to the building manager. Get the security footage. There is no security footage. The camera in the entrance hall hasn't worked in 3 years. How do you know that? I didn't have an answer that wouldn't sound suspicious. I closed the door and locked it, deadbolt and chain both. Stood there listening to her footsteps retreat down the hallway. Back to the stairs, back to her apartment with its bloody handprint. I went to my laptop and pulled up my email, scrolled back. 4 months. 5 months. There. Subject line. Noise complaint. Apartment 5. I'd written it at 2 a.m. after a particularly bad shift. Close had been playing his radio loud enough that I could hear every word of some talk show host ranting about immigrants and taxes. I'd been on a call with a customer who was already angry, and the radio bleeding through my wall had made it impossible to concentrate. The customer had threatened to report me to my supervisor. I'd logged off, furious, and fired off an email to the building management. Anonymous, of course. I'd created a throwaway email address just for this. Described the noise, the late hours, the smell of cigarettes seeping under my door. Suggested that maybe Close wasn't fit to live independently anymore. Mentioned that I'd heard him talking to himself, that he seemed confused, that perhaps someone should check on his mental state. I'd felt righteous when I sent it. Justified. I was working from home, I needed quiet, and Close was a nuisance. The building manager had responded within a week, thanked me for the report, said they'd look into it. 2 weeks later, I'd seen the eviction notice on Close's door. I'd felt a moment of guilt standing in the hallway staring at that notice. But then I'd gone back to my apartment and worked my shift in blissful silence, and the guilt had faded. These things happened. The building had rules. Close should have been more considerate. He'd fought the eviction. I'd heard him on the phone through the wall, his voice rising and falling, pleading with someone. The building manager probably, or a lawyer, or social services. I'd put on my headphones and ignored it. The eviction went through 3 weeks ago. Close had 1 month to find new housing, except he didn't make it that long. The stress, maybe. The fear of being homeless at 72, whatever it was, his heart had given out 3 days ago, and they'd carried him out in a body bag while I'd watched through my peephole. I closed my laptop, my hands were shaking again. It was a coincidence. The knocking, the figure in the hallway, the face that looked like Close. All of it was stress, lack of sleep, guilt, manifesting as hallucination. Shared hallucination, maybe. The woman from number 7 had seen something too, but that didn't mean it was real. Buildings like this, they got into your head. The thin walls, the constant noise, the way everyone's misery bled together until you couldn't tell where yours ended and someone else's began. I made myself eat something, shower, get dressed, log into work. The day crawled past. I took calls, read from scripts, and tried not to think about bloody handprints or empty eyes, or the way the figure had walked past my door like I didn't exist. Round 6 p.m., Mrs. Hoffman knocked on my door. I knew it was her before I opened it. She knocked softly, apologetically, the way she always did when she needed to borrow something or complain about the water pressure. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said when I opened the door. She was small, 70-something, with hair dyed an unnatural shade of red and glasses that magnified her eyes. "But have you noticed anything strange lately?" "Strange how?" "The lights in the hallway, they've been acting up, flickering on and off at odd hours. And I keep hearing footsteps." She lowered her voice. "At night. Someone walking up and down the stairs." "It's an old building," I said. "The wiring's probably shot." "It's not the wiring." She glanced toward the stairs, then back at me. "I looked through my peephole last night. Someone was standing outside my door, just standing there, not knocking, not moving, just standing." "Did you see who it was?" "No. The light was flickering too much, but I saw their shadow, and I heard them breathing." She wrapped her coat tighter around herself. "It sounded wrong, like they were struggling, like it hurt." I wanted to close the door. I wanted to tell her she was imagining things, that she'd been watching too many crime shows, that there was nothing to worry about. Instead, I said, "Did they try to get in?" "No. They just stood there for a few minutes, then moved on, up to the next floor." She looked at me with those magnified eyes. I wanted to ask, "Did they come to your door too?" "No," I said. "Nobody came to my door." She nodded slowly, like this confirmed something she'd been thinking. "Strange. They went to every other door on this floor. I heard them knock on number 6, but not yours." A pause. "Why do you think that is?" "I don't know, Mrs. Hoffman. Herr Close lived across from you," she said. "Did you two get along?" The question hit me like a punch. "What? Before he died, were you friends?" "We were neighbors. We didn't really talk." "That's what I thought." She adjusted her glasses. "He mentioned you once, said you worked from home, same as him, being retired. Said he tried to keep quiet during the day so you could work. He was considerate that way." The guilt came back, sharp and hot. I forced it down. "I should get back to work." "Of course." "I'm sorry to bother you." She turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. The building manager came by today. Someone reported blood on one of the doors upstairs. He's having the whole building checked. Police might come by to ask questions." "Okay. If they ask me, I'll tell them about the footsteps, about someone standing outside my door." She looked at me again. "Will you tell them too, if they ask?" She nodded and shuffled back to her apartment. I closed my door and locked it. Close had tried to keep quiet. He'd been considerate, and I'd reported him anyway because his existence had been an inconvenience to me. I sat at my desk and stared at the wall separating my apartment from number 5. The crack in the plaster seemed wider than before, branching further, like it was trying to reach something. That night, I didn't even pretend to work. I sat in the dark and waited. 2:38, right on schedule. The footsteps started below. I listened to them climb, tracking their progress. First floor, second floor. The motion sensor light clicked on in the hallway, and I knew without looking that the figure was there. 3 knocks on Mrs. Hoffman's door. I counted the pause. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4 Mississippi. 3 knocks on number 6. Footsteps moving past my door, not slowing, not pausing, just walking past, like the door was part of the wall. Up to the 3rd floor, 3 knocks per door, methodical and patient. I got up and went to my window. The street below was empty, the flickering street light casting uneven shadows. But as I watched, the building's front door opened. Nobody came out. The door just stood open, the entrance hall visible beyond it. Empty. The broken bicycle frames and junk mail were exactly where they'd always been. Then the motion sensor light inside the entrance hall flickered on. Nobody was there. The light had triggered itself, or something had moved through it too fast to see. The light flickered again, strobing, on, off, like something was interfering with the sensor. I watched the entrance hall. The light continued to flicker. And in one of the flashes, just for a moment, I saw a figure standing at the bottom of the stairs. Heavy build, stained cardigan, face turned toward the stairwell, toward the 2nd floor, toward my window. The light went out. When it flickered back on, the figure was gone. The front door closed with its hydraulic hiss. I stepped back from the window, my heart doing that complicated thing again. My breath was fogging the glass. I wiped it away with my sleeve and looked down at the street again. Empty. Nothing moving. Just the flickering street light and the dark storefronts and the night pressing against the glass. I went back to my desk and opened my laptop. Typed, "Can dead people leave fingerprints?" into the search bar. The results were all forensic articles about corpses and crime scenes. I closed the browser. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is the woman from 7. Police came. They took samples from my door. The blood is type AB negative. Same as hair clothes. They're checking dental records now." I stared at the message. Type AB negative. Close's blood type. I didn't know how she knew that, but she sounded certain. Another message. "Building manager says the camera in the entrance hall is broken. But I found something. Check the light fixture outside your door." I didn't want to check. I wanted to delete the message, block the number, and pretend this wasn't happening. Instead, I unlocked my door and stepped into the hallway. The motion sensor light clicked on. The hallway looked exactly like it always did. Peeling wallpaper, scuffed floor, Hoffman's door on my left, the students on my right, number 5 directly across from me with its curling notice. I looked up at the light fixture. Standard fluorescent tube, covered by a yellowed plastic panel. And on the plastic panel, pressed against it from inside somehow, was a handprint, dark, rusty. the same color as the marks on the woman's door upstairs. 4 fingers and a thumb, clear enough to see the whorls and ridges, a complete print, pressed against the inside of the light fixture like someone had reached up from below and pushed. I stood there staring at it until the motion sensor light clicked off, plunging the hallway into darkness. Then I went back inside and locked my door. Deadbolt and chain both. The fingerprint was still there in the morning. I checked before work, standing in the hallway with my coffee pretending to check my mailbox, while I stared up at the light fixture. The handprint was clear in the daylight, impossible to miss, impossible to explain. I went back inside and pulled up my email, scrolled to the message I'd sent 4 months ago. Read it again, every word dripping with anonymous malice, every sentence designed to paint close as a problem that needed to be solved. I'd solved him, all right. And now he was knocking on every door in the building except mine, leaving his prints in impossible places, walking past my apartment like I was the only person here who didn't exist. Not yet, anyway. I stopped sleeping entirely after that. Not by choice. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, watching the water stain that looked like a face, and my body would refuse to let go. Every time I felt myself drifting, my eyes would snap open, and my heart would start that complicated rhythm again, like it was trying to warn me about something my conscious mind didn't want to accept. The 4th night, I sat at my desk with every light in my apartment blazing. My laptop was open to a spreadsheet I hadn't touched in hours. My coffee had gone cold again. I'd stopped bothering to make fresh cups. The caffeine didn't help anyway. 2:38 approached like an execution. I watched the clock in the corner of my screen. 2:36, 2:37, 2:38. Nothing. No footsteps from below, no heavy treads climbing the stairs, just the usual building sounds. Pipes groaning, someone's refrigerator humming through the wall, the distant sound of traffic. I let myself breathe. Maybe it was over. Maybe whatever had been happening had run its course. 4 nights was enough for a haunting, right? Ghosts got bored, moved on, found better things to do than knock on doors in a shitty apartment building. 2:39, 2:40. The footsteps started directly outside my door, not below, not climbing the stairs. Right there in the hallway, like someone had materialized on the 2nd floor landing. Heavy, deliberate. The same shuffling gait I'd heard through my wall for 2 years. The motion sensor light clicked on. I could see the glow under my door, that sickly fluorescent wash that made everything look like a crime scene. I didn't move. Couldn't move. My hands were gripping the edge of my desk so hard that my fingers had gone numb. The footsteps moved to Mrs. Hoffman's door. 3 knocks. Purposeful. The pause. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4 Mississippi. Footsteps to number 6. 3 knocks. Then the footsteps came toward my door. They stopped directly in front of number 4. I stared at my door like it was a bomb about to detonate. The deadbolt was locked. The chain was on. But standing between me and whatever was in that hallway was just a cheap, hollow core door. The kind that cost maybe 50 euros at a hardware store, the kind you could punch through if you were angry enough. 3 knocks. The sound reverberated through my apartment, louder than they should have been, harder. Like whoever was knocking was using something heavier than knuckles. I sat frozen at my desk. My breath was coming in short gasps. The coffee cup next to my laptop was shaking, ripples spreading across the cold surface. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4 Mississippi. The footsteps didn't move on. They should have moved on, up to the 3rd floor, continuing the pattern, checking off the list. That's what had happened every other night. Knock and move on, knock and move on. But the footsteps stayed right where they were. I could hear breathing on the other side of the door, labored, like someone drowning on dry land, like Close's coughing fits at 3 in the morning. The ones that had kept me awake, the ones I'd mentioned in my anonymous email. I know you're in there. The voice came through the door, muffled but clear, thick, like speaking through a mouthful of something. Close's voice. I'd heard it 100 times. In the hallway, mumbling to himself, on the phone, pleading with someone. Through the wall, talking to his radio, like it could talk back. I know you're listening. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to let go of the desk. I pressed them against my thighs, trying to stop the trembling. It didn't work. You don't have to say anything. I just want you to know I'm here. The breathing continued, wet and wrong. I stared at the gap under my door, at the strip of fluorescent light bleeding through. And in that light, I could see a shadow. 2 feet, standing perfectly still. I knocked on every door, the voice said. Every single one. Do you know why? I didn't answer. Couldn't answer. My throat had closed up. I was looking for the one that didn't answer. The one that pretended not to be home. The one that hid. A pause. I found it. The shadow under the door shifted, like whoever was standing there had moved closer, pressed themselves against the wood. You reported me, Close said, 4 months ago. Anonymous email said I was a nuisance, said I was mentally unfit, said someone should check on me. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. How did he know? The email had been anonymous, untraceable. I'd used a throwaway account, never mentioned my apartment number, never signed my name. They came to check on me, the voice continued. Social services, building manager. They asked questions, looked through my apartment, treated me like I was senile, like I was a problem. The breathing grew heavier. Because of you. I wanted to deny it, to shout through the door that he was wrong, that it wasn't me, that I'd never do something like that. But the words wouldn't come. I fought the eviction. Did you know that? Spent every penny I had on a lawyer. Didn't matter. They had documentation, complaints, evidence, a sound that might have been a laugh. Anonymous evidence. My laptop screen had gone dark. The only light in my apartment now was the glow from the hallway seeping under my door, outlining those 2 feet that stood perfectly still. I had 1 month to find a new place, at 72, on a pension, in this city. The voice was getting thicker, harder to understand. Do you know what that does to a person? The stress, the fear? I knew. Of course I knew. I'd heard him on the phone, through the wall, his voice breaking, pleading. I'd heard him pacing at night, the same route over and over, like he was trying to walk himself into a solution. I'd heard everything. I just hadn't cared. My heart gave out 3 days before the eviction date, Close said. Right there in my apartment, across the hall from you. I lay on my kitchen floor for 6 hours before anyone found me. A pause. You were home. I could hear you talking. Customer service voice. Professional. Calm. I had been home. I remembered that day. A system update had pushed my shift to the afternoon. I'd been on calls all day, reading from scripts, solving other people's problems, while Close died 20 feet away. I called for help, the voice said. Did you know that? I called out, loud as I could. But you had your headphones on. The shadow under the door moved again. Closer. I could see the outline of fingers now pressed against the gap like he was trying to reach through. Open the door. No, I whispered. Open the door. No, open it. The doorknob rattled. Twice. The deadbolt held, but the chain swung against the doorframe, clinking softly. I stood up from my desk. My legs were shaking so badly I almost fell. I backed away from the door, toward the window, toward the far corner of my apartment where the walls met and there was nowhere else to go. You killed me, Close said. Not with your hands, but you killed me just the same. Anonymous email. Coward's weapon. You didn't even have the decency to face me. The doorknob rattled again, harder this time. I knocked on every door in this building, every single one. Gave them all a chance to answer, to see me, to acknowledge what happened. The breathing was so loud now I could hear it over my own heartbeat. Everyone saw me except you. You hid. Just like you hid when you sent that email, just like you hid when I was dying across the hall. I didn't know, I said. My voice came out as a croak. I didn't know you were dying. You didn't want to know. There's a difference. He was right. I'd heard the sounds through the wall, the coughing, the pacing, the phone calls that went on for hours. I'd heard all of it and put on my headphones and turned up the volume and pretended it wasn't happening, because Close's suffering had been inconvenient. Open the door, he said again. I can't. Why not? Because I was a coward. Because I'd spent my whole life avoiding confrontation, hiding behind anonymous emails and closed doors and customer service scripts that told me exactly what to say, so I never had to think for myself. Because facing Close, really facing him, seeing what I'd done, was more than I could handle. Because you're dead, I said instead. Silence. The breathing stopped. The shadow under the door went perfectly still. Then Close laughed. It was a wet sound, like something bubbling up from deep water. It went on for too long, rising and falling, until it didn't sound like laughter anymore. It sounded like choking. You think that matters? He said when the sound finally stopped. You think being dead changes what you did? What you are? The doorknob rattled again. The deadbolt held. The chain held. but I could hear the wood creaking, like something was pressing against it, testing its strength. "I'm not going anywhere," Close said. "I'll be here tomorrow night and the night after and the night after that. Every night at 2:38, I'll knock on your door, and you'll hide, just like you always do." "Please," I said. "I'm sorry." "Sorry isn't enough. What do you want?" "I want you to open the door. I want you to look at me. I want you to see what you did." I pressed myself into the corner as far from the door as I could get. My apartment was small enough that it didn't matter. 12 steps from the door to the window. 15 steps from the door to the bathroom. Nowhere to run. Nowhere to hide. "I can't," I said. "Then I'll wait." The shadow under the door shifted again, and I realized with a sick feeling that Close was sitting down, right there in the hallway, his back against my door, settling in. "The building will wake up in a few hours," he said. "Mrs. Hoffman will go to the bathroom. The student will practice his violin. The couple upstairs will fight about something stupid. And I'll still be here." The motion sensor light in the hallway clicked off, plunging everything into darkness. "I've got nothing but time," Close said from the other side of the door. "What about you?" I stood in the corner of my apartment and waited for the sun to come up. It felt like it took years. My legs ached from standing. My eyes burned from staring at the door. Every few minutes I'd hear a sound from the hallway. A shift of weight, a wet breath, the soft scrape of fabric against wood. He was still there. When dawn finally came, gray and weak, through my window, the shadow was gone from under my door. The hallway was silent. I waited another hour before I risked moving, creeping toward the door on legs that barely held me, pressing my ear against the wood. Nothing. I looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. The motion sensor light was off. Hoffman's door was closed. The student's door was closed. And across from me, number 5's door still had its curling notice, exactly where it had always been. I unlocked my deadbolt, kept the chain on, opened the door a crack. The hallway smelled like cigarettes and something sour. Close's smell. It hung in the air like he'd just been there, just walked past, just pressed his face against my door and breathed. I looked down. There were marks on my door, rusty, smeared across the wood at shoulder height, like someone had leaned against it for hours. And lower, at knee level, more marks, like someone had been sitting. I closed the door, locked it, put the chain back on, called in sick to work, sent an email saying I had food poisoning, would be back tomorrow, sorry for the inconvenience. My supervisor responded within 5 minutes. "Feel better. Let us know if you need coverage." I didn't need coverage. I needed to leave this building, pack my shit and get out and never come back. But I couldn't afford to break my lease. Couldn't afford first and last month's rent somewhere else. Couldn't afford anything except staying right here in this apartment with its thin walls and cheap door and the ghost of the man I'd killed sitting in the hallway. I spent the day trying to clean the marks off my door. Used every cleaner I had, dish soap, bathroom spray, the bottle of rubbing alcohol I kept for disinfecting my keyboard. The marks faded but didn't disappear. They left shadows in the wood grain, dark impressions that looked like they'd been burned in. Hoffman came by around noon. I heard her knock softly, apologetically, but I didn't answer. She knocked again, waited. Then I heard her talking to someone else in the hallway. He's not answering. Maybe he's not home. His door has marks on it too. The woman from number 7. Same as mine. Same as everyone's. Everyone's? Every door he knocked on. They all have marks now. The police took samples from mine. They're testing them. What do they think it is? They won't say, but I heard one of them talking to his partner. He said the prints match someone who died 3 days ago. Silence. That's impossible, Mrs. Hoffman said. I know. More silence. Then footsteps retreating down the hallway. I stood at my door, my ear pressed against the wood, listening to them leave. Every door. Marks on every door he'd knocked on. Except he'd knocked on my door for the first time last night, which meant I was last. The final apartment on his list. The one he'd been saving. I looked at my phone. 12:47 p.m. 13 hours and 51 minutes until 2:38. I could leave. Pack a bag, check into a hotel, stay somewhere else until this was over. Except I didn't think it would be over. I thought Close would just follow me, knock on whatever door I hid behind, wait outside until I had to face him. Because this wasn't about the building. It was about me. The day crawled past. I tried to eat and couldn't. Tried to work and couldn't focus. Tried to watch something on my laptop and ended up staring at the screen without seeing it. At 6 p.m., someone knocked on my door again. I looked through the peephole. The building manager stood in the hallway, clipboard in hand, looking annoyed. He knocked again, harder. I know you're in there. I can hear you moving around. I opened the door. I kept the chain on. What? I need to talk to you about the marks on your door. Several tenants have reported. He stopped, stared at the door. Jesus, when did that happen? Last night. Did you see who did it? No. He leaned closer, examining the marks. This is the same substance that's on the other doors. The police are calling it biological material. They think someone's playing a prank, spreading something around. He looked at me. You didn't hear anything? Someone in the hallway? No. The camera in the entrance hall is broken, so we don't have footage. But if this happens again, call the police immediately. Don't wait. He made a, okay. He left. I closed the door and locked it. Biological material. Close's blood. Close's fingerprints. Close's hands pressed against every door he'd knocked on, leaving proof that he'd been there. Proof that something impossible was happening. I sat at my desk and watched the clock. 7 p.m., 8 p.m., 9 p.m. The building settled into its evening rhythm. Hoffman's television, the student's violin, the couple upstairs having sex or fighting, normal sounds, living sounds. At 2:38, they stopped. The footsteps started in the hallway, right outside my door. No climbing stairs, no working through the building. Just there like he'd never left. 3 knocks. I stared at my door, at the marks that wouldn't wash away, at the deadbolt and chain that suddenly seemed like the flimsiest things in the world. I'm back, Close said. I didn't answer. I told you I would be. I keep my promises. The wet breathing started again. Unlike you. The shadow appeared under my door. 2 feet, standing. You didn't open the door last night. That's okay. I'm patient. We can try again tonight, and tomorrow night, and every night after that, until you do. I'm not opening the door, I said. Then I'll wait. The shadow shifted, sitting down again, settling in for another night. Do you know what it's like? Close asked. Dying alone? Calling for help and having nobody come? Lying on your kitchen floor watching the light fade and knowing that the person who could save you is 20 feet away and doesn't care enough to check? I closed my eyes. That's what you did to me. And now I'm going to do the same to you. I'm going to stand outside your door every night. And you're going to hide in there, listening, knowing I'm waiting, knowing I'll never leave. And eventually, days, weeks, months from now, you'll open that door. Why? I whispered. Because you won't be able to stand it anymore. The waiting, the fear, the guilt. The breathing grew louder. Because you're a coward and cowards always break. I opened my eyes, stared at the door. He was right. I'd broken when Close's radio was too loud. Sent an anonymous email instead of knocking on his door and asking him to turn it down. I'd broken when I heard him dying across the hall. Put on my headphones instead of checking to see if he was okay. I broke every time. Life required me to face something uncomfortable. And I'd break again, eventually. Close knew it. I knew it. Please, I said, just tell me what you want. I want you to open the door. And then what? Silence. The shadow under the door shifted, standing again. Moving closer, I could see fingers now pressed into the gap like he was trying to reach through. Open the door and find out. I backed away, toward the window, toward the corner where the walls met. I can't. You will. The doorknob rattled. The deadbolt held. The chain held. But I could hear something else now, a new sound, rhythmic, like fingernails dragging across wood, scratching. Close was scratching at my door, slowly, methodically, the same way he'd knocked. 3 scratches, pause. 3 scratches, pause. I'll be here every night, he said, right here, outside your door, waiting. The scratching continued. I slid down the wall until I was sitting, my knees pulled to my chest, my hands pressed over my ears. It didn't help. I could still hear it. The scratching, the breathing, the wet sound of Close's voice filtering through the wood. Every night, he said again, until you open the door. The motion sensor light in the hallway clicked off. The scratching continued in the darkness. And I sat in the corner of my apartment listening to the sound of my own guilt, knowing that sooner or later, tonight, tomorrow, a week from now, I would stand up and walk to that door and unlock it. Because Close was right, cowards always break. The scratching stopped. The shadow remained.